Welcome to Checks and Balances. I'm Vincent. This is Blair. And this week, short-term debt.
So today's topic, Mike, short-term debt.
Yep.
Some might refer to it as bad debt, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
Growing your wealth is a lot of fun, but one thing we want to really get into as we go is where people tend to fall over, explaining the topic, and then how they can get around it a little bit better.
Yeah, and short-term debt is one of the common pitfalls that we see across both of our sort of sectors, across the wealth side and the mortgages. We've covered this a couple of times, with people hiding this sort of stuff from their partner, not telling them about it, and then eventually it all comes out, and it's usually at a worse scenario than if they just addressed it earlier on.
Yeah, and bad debts, short-term debts, credit cards, overdrafts, you get used to these things really young.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when I was at school, when I was in my last year of school, my friend Tim Wilson comes over to me and goes, "James, ASB's just given me a free $1,000. I said, "Tim, you spent that money yet?" He goes, "It wasn't free, was it?" Anyway, it was all gone.
Yeah.
It took him a while to pay it back. But you think about how many kids take on which are great products for the banks really to be providing, but giving those overdrafts and how long those kids get stuck with those overdrafts for.
Yeah, and not a disservice here because they are useful in some instances, but banks do try and target these products towards younger people. You'll see this, as you go sign up for university, they'll be targeting you with accounts, overdrafts, credit cards, and all these sorts of things that actually, when you're not earning a lot and can't make the repayments, can lead you down a bit of a bad path.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about different types of short-term debts. But before we do that, I think one thing that's quite important to touch on is there are scenarios where these are quite helpful to use. If you're a little bit more structured with your finance, you can probably get around it. But if you end up with a big dentist bill and you've got no other option, maybe you need to get a small credit card loan or personal loan, but ideally you have an emergency fund or something like that you can work through.
Yeah, and leaning back on these sorts of debts from time to time and paying them off in a reasonable amount of time is completely normal.
Yeah.
What we're sort of coming at the angle from today is you can get stuck with these things for a long time and it can cost you a lot of interest.
Yeah. So first type of short-term debt, what have we got, Mike?
We'll start with personal loans. So these are probably more on the what I consider the good and bad side. It depends what you're taking the loan out for. Quite often people take these out for cars that they can't usually afford, large weddings, these sorts of big ticket items, one-off purchases. While they do provide a structured sort of time to repay them, so it'll be over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years even. They do have higher interest rates because they're unsecured, when you compare them to a home loan or something like that. And I think fundamentally what it comes down to with personal loans is just think about what are you actually buying here and can you reasonably afford this, and it's always cars.
It is always cars, and of course I'm going to say for something that's a want, like a car or a holiday, a wedding, probably go back on the spending, but I could understand if it was a personal loan for a wedding if you hadn't saved for it.
Yeah.
It's still not ideal. But a car loan's really, if you want to save for it, don't be spending money you don't have.
Yeah, and I actually see this quite a bit when we do come to do mortgage applications for people. We'll go through their financials, how much do you earn, what are your expenses, and then I'll say, do you have any short-term debt? And the application is usually looking pretty good up until they go, I've got this $45,000 car loan. How much do you pay? Oh, I can't remember if it's $600 a month or $600 a week.
Well, money.
Yeah, and it really chops down their ability to take out a mortgage, so can actually impact them over the long term, in other ways, even if they are making the regular repayments.
Yeah. Great. So number 2 after personal loans is buy now, pay later finance.
Definitely in trend now.
We're seeing a lot of, it's interesting because you're seeing a trend with millennials not wanting to take on credit cards.
Yeah.
But buy now, pay later is very interesting to see how popular it is. In fact, Mike, last year, 20% of all clothing and shoe purchases were made on buy now, pay later, after pay type platforms.
Yeah, it's an astounding stat, really.
Yeah. Another really interesting part of it as well, as stat man, is that 61% of those who used Afterpay were female, and a lot of the marketing and advertising is geared towards women as well, which is it's clothing, like buying a new pair of shoes or a shirt or something and borrowing money to pay for it. I'm not going to like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it does present an alternative to credit cards, and quite often it may present a better interest rate and that sort of thing. But fundamentally, what we're going to keep touching on today is what are you buying, and you've got to remember that you are borrowing to buy these things, so you will end up paying sometimes more.
Well, the interesting thing with some of these, Mike, is some of them don't have an interest rate. So some of them, I think Afterpay is an example, and I might be wrong, it might be another one, where the way their model is they charge the shop percentage so that they can still close the sale with the client, and they don't pay for the clothing except over the 4 payments of what it's actually worth. But it's still like, if you needed that item, and making sure you can actually make those payments so there's no penalties, that you kind of get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so what's the next type?
Yeah, so this is one that, we don't see so much anymore, but has been regulated a little bit more, but is particularly nasty, which are payday loans. If you're going for a payday loan, you no doubt need it, but it's a real last resort. These have much higher interest rates quite often. In the past, they've been almost designed so that you don't pay them off and you continue to roll them over. You get into that sort of debt cycle, that trap, and very difficult to get out of when you're on that lower income.
Yeah. And if you're in a position where maybe the income is already tight and the expenses are very tight, you don't want to be spending all your money servicing interest only for that interest to grow in a loan and just end up spiraling through this pit where you're like, how do I get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Great. Next one, credit cards. One that's very common in New Zealand. Interestingly enough, $3.7 billion of spending on credit cards in New Zealand last month, and 2.7 million Kiwis have credit cards.
Yeah.
I have changed my tune on credit cards, I'd say, over the last couple of years, where people go, oh, James, I get some points on it. Helps me pay for my flights back home.
Yeah.
I get to use my points to pay for my DIY. I've now decided that's all crap.
Yeah.
So if you're very good, that's fine. But I know that 35% of Kiwis do not pay off their credit card each month.
Yeah.
Which means you're just, that percentage is just lying to themselves.
Yeah.
And the points don't matter. You're in a negative position. Just get a debit card, really.
But James, what about my hot points? Cool. And I think one of the last ones we'll cover off, which is a little bit similar to that, and it's probably a little bit more specific, is the Gem Visa. So like a credit card, usually targeted around certain retailers that offer interest-free periods. Can be really good to put things on. Some of the things to watch there are just the fees that you're going to pay in terms of monthly statement fees, account fees, those sorts of things. But also, what is the interest rate if you don't make those payments?
That's a big one, isn't it? Like 40 months interest free.
Yeah.
What happens at the end of the 40 months? Did you read the fine print?
Yeah.
It's really like those kind of cards are really a marketing tool, so people get to sell their couch or their TV or whatever. And also the kind of dependency on debt as well.
Yeah.
And you know that I love an investment property home loan, but this kind of debt, you go, yeah. So anyway, they're the different types of short-term debts. Let's talk about some of the dangers, Mike. So we've touched on some of these already, but what are the real problems with some of these debts? Where are people getting in trouble?
Yeah, I think one of the first ones, or the big one, is that people just don't know what they're signing up for, or don't read the fine print, or perhaps they're in a desperate situation where they don't really care about the fine print, and that can often lead to pitfalls later on. Once the sugar high has worn off and you have whatever you went out to buy, and you're making those repayments, and you do miss a payment. Yeah. Or something goes wrong and the funds don't come out of your account on the right day, or something like that, and all of a sudden actually you can end up with significantly more interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you're thinking about not paying attention to the fine print, absolutely not, because you're thinking about, God, I'm going to look snazzy in this 1996 Honda Civic. I don't think you get a car loan for that. But I'm looking snazzy in my new car, or my new TV, or my new lounge suite's going to look awesome in the house.
But that's what they're designed to do, right?
Yeah, 100%. Great. The next danger is the interest rate. So the interest rates can vary anywhere from 10% to 40%, depending on what kind of loan it is. The danger with these kind of interest rates is you make less than the minimum repayments, and then you end up paying less than the interest continues to grow, and you end up in this spiraling hole where you go, I bought $1,000 TV, and now I've got $2,500 worth of debt. How do I get myself out of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other ones there, I guess around the payday loans is, I touched on it before, they are regulated a little bit more these days, but there's still, not a lot of regulation around that industry really. You can get daily interest rates on them that are charged and these sorts of things. So, be very careful if you are resorting to those. Yeah,
I can just see some of the numbers we've got at 0.25%, 0.8% per day interest on short-term loans, where when you're thinking about it, what is a kind of paycheck loan? It's going, I'm a couple $100, I don't have any money in my bank account, and it's really just stabbing those people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been a little bit depressing, Mike. Lots of debts that James says to stay away from. What are some ways to avoid the rabbit hole that we can stay out of trouble?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious one here is if it's a want and not a need, save up for it. This is something you're always going to hear James talk about. Is it worth taking on this debt, just for the instant gratification?
Yeah. I mean, my general rule with loans is if it's making you money, that's fine. If it's getting you ahead, that's fine. If it's something that's going down in value or something that will just, make you look pretty, it's probably not worth it. So number one is make sure you're really careful and you're saving for what you need. Number two is, if you're not good with money, don't lie to yourself about credit cards.
Yeah.
I must say I get quite a bit of joy cutting up my customers' credit cards. They give me this look like, Mike, don't make me do it. But if you just use a debit card, if you're not good with the budget, I would just stay away from it.
Yeah, and that probably leads into our last one as well, which is, and you often hear James and myself talk about this, which is create a budget, build that emergency fund, make sure you have some residual, some cash there left for these sorts of emergencies, or these snap wants, right?
Well, the emergency fund is, I think, if you don't have an emergency fund, that's the real need for these short-term debts. Dentist bills, broken laptops, car repairs. If you've got an emergency fund, there should be no scenario you need to be paying high interest rates on bad debts. Great. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. That's our topic for the week. Once again, a reminder, if there's a topic you'd be interested in us talking about, please send it through, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.
Cheers.